A scientist was recorded in 1986 descending into the internal areas of the Chernobyl plant after the nuclear accident. The image shows part of the technical work carried out to assess the damage and begin containment operations. The episode became one of the most well-known events in the history of nuclear energy. Allied troops were recorded boarding ships during the Dunkirk evacuation in 1940. The operation, carried out in northern France, involved hundreds of military and civilian vessels that helped rescue thousands of soldiers. Jocelyn Kaweri, 20 years old, was photographed in May 1976 in Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War. The young Maronite became known for her active participation in the armed clashes that marked a period of intense division in the country. Aircraft from the Far East Air Force's Bomber Command of the United States were recorded on January 18, 1951, dropping a large amount of ordnance on a strategic target in North Korea. The action was part of intense air operations during the Korean War. Tracks in the snow recorded in Yangji, Korea, in January 1951 revealed the presence of a civilian who had lost his life during the Korean War. The scene was documented as evidence of the harsh conditions faced by the population amid the conflict. An F-9F-2 fighter was recorded floating in the water after crashing onto the bow of the aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea, CV-47, near Korea. Commander R. Weymouth stands on the nose of the aircraft waiting for rescue. The episode illustrates the risks faced in naval operations with jet aircraft in the early 1950s. Henry Ford was photographed in 1938 receiving the Grand Cross of the Order of the German Eagle from German authorities. The honor was awarded to distinguished foreigners, and its presentation took place at an official ceremony before the start of the Second World War. A German woman was photographed in the 1920s, burning large amounts of banknotes during the period of hyperinflation, when money had lost real value. The notes became so cheap that many families used them as fuel in place of wood or coal. U.S. Navy landing craft were recorded at 8:59 a.m. on February 19, 1945, heading toward the beaches of Iwo Jima. The operation marked the start of one of the best-known actions of the Pacific Campaign during the Second World War. Two Armenian women were photographed in 1895, posing with their rifles before setting out to confront the Ottoman Empire. The image symbolizes women's participation in resistance movements at the end of the 19th century. Crew members were photographed on April 7, 1951, on top of their tank after becoming stuck in the Hantan riverbed in Korea while trying to cross a shallow section. The vehicle bogged down due to high water levels and was later pulled out with the help of a recovery tank. Winston Churchill and Charles de Gaulle were photographed on November 11, 1944, walking along the Avenue des Champs-Élysées in Paris during the Armistice Day parade. The event took place a few months after the city's liberation, symbolically marking the union between France and the United Kingdom. The aircraft carrier HMS Invincible was photographed on September 17, 1982, during its ceremonial return after the Falklands War. Sea King helicopters and Sea Harrier FRS-1 fighters were lined up on deck, symbols of the Royal Navy's embarked air power. William Patrick Hitler, the son of Adolf Hitler's half-brother, Alois, was photographed on March 6, 1944, taking the oath to join the United States Navy at a recruiting station in New York. A man was photographed in 1923 riding a bicycle down the Eiffel Tower in Paris. The unusual feat combined daring and spectacle at one of the world's most famous monuments. The image drew attention for the mix of acrobatics and the iconic setting of the French capital. The Spruce Goose, the largest flying boat ever built, was designed and developed by the Hughes Aircraft Company and made its only flight on November 2, 1947, in Long Beach, California. The aircraft, impressed with monumental dimensions, the result of an ambitious project begun during the Second World War. A woman was photographed on August 18, 1945, sawing part of a wagon during the historic flood in Gävle, Sweden. The event left streets underwater and forced residents to improvise solutions to deal with material damage. Between 1897 and 1930, the city of Seattle undertook a vast regrading project that lowered entire hills to ease urban expansion. Machines and work crews removed millions of cubic yards of earth, radically changing the central topography. A surgery in progress was recorded around 1890 in the amphitheater of Boston City Hospital. The space brought together doctors and medical students, allowing direct observation of surgical procedures as part of practical training. The scene illustrates hospital methods and conditions before the broad adoption of modern asepsis. Nose art on a B-24 Liberator bomber was recorded during the 1940s, reflecting the common practice of personalizing military aircraft with illustrations. These paintings ranged from symbols and mascots to popular characters, serving as creative expression for crews during missions. United States President Gerald Ford was photographed in Madrid in 1975 beside Francisco Franco during an official visit to Spain. The meeting took place a few months before the Spanish leader's death and represented one of the final diplomatic engagements of Ford's administration. A woman was photographed in 1923 wearing a dress made from nearly worthless German banknotes, the result of hyperinflation that struck the country after the First World War. The scene symbolizes the extreme devaluation of the currency, when notes were used in unusual ways, because they no longer had real buying power. Crew members of the nuclear aircraft carrier USS Enterprise were photographed on July 31, 1964, forming the equation EAEMC-2 on the flight deck while sailing with the cruiser USS Long Beach and the destroyer USS Bainbridge during Operation Sea Orbit. A German horseman was photographed in 1910 watching a biplane fly overhead. The scene symbolizes the contrast between traditional methods of combat, represented by cavalry, and new aerial technologies that were beginning to transform war and military mobility. A construction worker was photographed in 1930 during a break from work on the iconic Chrysler Building in New York. The skyscraper, which would become a symbol of Art Deco architecture, was nearing completion and represented the city's spirit of modernization. The Statue of Liberty was recorded in 1885, still in crates, during unloading in New York. after being sent from France as a gift to the American people. The parts were carefully transported for later assembly on Liberty Island, where the monument would be dedicated in 1886. King Frederick IX of Denmark was photographed in 1951, showing his tattooed torso, also revealing his dedication to sailing and bodybuilding. Unlike the traditional image of European monarchs, he cultivated interests that united physical discipline and a passion for the sea. Sophia Loren was photographed in 1956 after an accident during a rally in Italy while driving her Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. The images, taken by photographer Federico Patalani, show the actress in the midst of the unusual episode. An armorer was photographed around 1944 working on one of the 50 caliber Browning machine guns in the ball turret of a B-17 Flying Fortress. The position required constant maintenance due to the intense conditions of aerial missions. The old Stockholm telephone tower was recorded in 1890, connecting about 5,500 telephone lines in the Swedish capital. The elevated structure allowed the growing communications network to be organized and distributed during a period of rapid technological expansion. The newly built battleship HMS Vanguard was recorded in 1946, being guided by tugs. Designed during the Second World War, it was completed after the conflict and became the last battleship of its kind, launched by the Royal Navy. Harry Houdini was photographed in 1919 in a posed portrait that highlights his public image as an illusionist and escape artist. Recognized worldwide for his shows and demonstrations of skill, he was already considered one of the greatest performers of his generation. John Lennon was photographed in 1965 during a recording session at Abbey Road Studios in London. The period marked an intense phase of creative production by the Beatles, who transformed the music scene of the 1960s. The studio setting reveals part of the process behind compositions that would become global classics. Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon were photographed in 1958 during the filming of Some Like It Hot, a feature that would become a major Hollywood classic. The image shows the actors in a relaxed mood behind the scenes of Billy Wilder's production. Lonnie Johnson, an American engineer and inventor, was photographed in the 1980s holding the toy he created, the Super Soaker, along with his United States patent. The device, a pump-action water gun, quickly became one of the most popular toys in the world. Customers were photographed in 1949 buying bread and snacks at a drive-through market that also served as a liquor store in Los Angeles. The quick service model reflected post-war changes in consumption, with the growing popularity of the automobile and urban convenience. The ship Marine Angel, 600 feet long and 70 feet wide, was recorded in 1953 crossing the Chicago River. The maneuver impressed because of the vessel's size contrasted with the limited width of the waterway. Martin County, known as the Incubator Doctor, was recorded around 1900 at the start of his pioneering work on behalf of premature newborns. His public demonstrations of incubators drew attention to the importance of the equipment at a time when hospitals did not yet use them widely. French weightlifter Ernest Cadine the 1920 Olympic champion, was photographed in 1923, showing his physique. Recognized for his performance at the Antwerp Games, Cadine became a reference in the sport and a symbol of physical strength in the interwar period. An ostrich-drawn cart was stopped by police in Los Angeles for exceeding the speed limit around 1930. The curious episode reflected both creativity in using unusual means of transport and the authorities' effort to enforce traffic rules in a growing city. Two women were photographed during a blizzard in 1922, walking through deep snow that covered the streets. The image shows everyday urban resilience in the face of extreme winter weather. Their heavy clothes reflect the fashion of the time, adapted to the intense cold. A soldier was photographed in 1989, posing with a machine gun in Tiananmen Square, Beijing. The image was made during the events that marked that year, when popular demonstrations took over much of the Chinese capital. President William Howard Taft was photographed playing golf in the 1910s, becoming the first American head of state associated with the sport. Taft used the activity for leisure and social meetings, reflecting the growing popularity of golf among the American elite of the era. Ronald Reagan was photographed in 1983 in a lighthearted moment at the White House, pretending to throw a punch at Muhammad Ali. The meeting brought together the President of the United States and the boxing champion, who was already considered one of the greatest sports figures of the 20th century. A street vendor in Japan was photographed between 1890 and 1896, carrying brooms and baskets for sale. This kind of street trade was common at the time, when artisans made everyday utensils from natural materials such as bamboo and straw. The east colonnade of the Kensico Reservoir was photographed in 1917, highlighting its fountain and cascading basin. Located in New York State, the reservoir was part of the water system that supported the city's growing population. The structure combined hydraulic function with monumental architectural elements. An enormous camera was displayed at a trade fair in Germany in 1931, drawing attention for its impressive scale. The model, more demonstrative than functional, represented the public's fascination with technological innovations in photography. A family was photographed in 1901, living in a house built inside a huge tree stump about 23 feet in diameter. This unusual adaptation was common in logging regions, where giant trunks could be used as improvised shelter. Actress Anita Ekberg was photographed in 1960 outside her home, holding a bow and arrow to drive away paparazzi who had followed her persistently during the night. The episode became one of the most unusual, involving the relationship between celebrities and photographers in Hollywood's golden era. People were photographed in 1941 enjoying a spring stroll on a shopping street in London's West End. The scene shows passers-by moving among windows and stores, keeping a sense of normalcy amid the context of the Second World War. A family was photographed in the 1950s, leaving a supermarket while pushing a cart full of groceries. The scene illustrates the spread of this new model of shopping, which brought a variety of products into one place and encouraged the use of metal carts. Oldriev's tricycle was recorded in 1882 as an example of innovations in personal transportation at the end of the 19th century. Three-wheeled vehicles were designed for leisure and practical mobility in urban areas. Danish model Winnie Holman was photographed in Cannes in 1975, at the height of her international career. The French resort, known for the glamour of the film festival, served as a backdrop for meetings among artists, models, and celebrities. Elizabeth Taylor was photographed in 1947 cooking beside her mother in Los Angeles, a simple moment of domestic life. Still a teenager, Taylor was already recognized as one of Hollywood's rising young stars. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis was photographed on July 31, 1976, piloting the Staten Island Ferry in New York. The moment occurred during the United States bicentennial celebrations, when many public figures took part in symbolic events. Caviar packing for export was recorded in 1960 at a fish plant in Astrakhan in the Soviet Union. The product, considered one of the most valuable in the fishing industry, was prepared on a large scale to supply international markets. Arnold Schwarzenegger was photographed in the 1970s when he was consolidating his career as a bodybuilder of international prominence. Titles such as Mr. Olympia helped build his image as a symbol of strength and discipline. A device released in 1951 combined a television, radio, and cocktail bar in a single cabinet, reflecting the era's desire for modern, multifunctional home solutions. The elegant design aimed to unite entertainment and practicality in one space, suiting the lifestyle of post-war urban families. Timekeepers were photographed at the 1912 Summer Olympics in Stockholm, Sweden, following events with precision instruments. Their role was essential to officially record results in a period when electronic technology was not yet available. A man in Poland was photographed in the 1980s recording a concert with a portable recorder. The use of cassette tape devices to capture musical performances was a common practice, reflecting fans' enthusiasm and technological advances in cultural consumption. Linda and Paul McCartney were photographed in 1976, alongside Sarah and Bob Dylan, together with Cher and Gregg Allman, in a rare gathering of major music figures. The scene brings together artists who deeply shaped the cultural landscape of the 1960s and 1970s. Sophia Loren was photographed in 1954, at the beginning of a career that soon made her one of the greatest stars of Italian and international cinema. At that time, she already drew attention for a commanding presence and talent that would lead to major roles in renowned productions. Habitat 67 was photographed during Expo 67 in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, standing out as one of the most innovative projects at the 1967 World's Fair. The modular housing complex, conceived by Israeli-Canadian architect Moshe Safdie, sought to rethink urban life through interconnected blocks. Members of the U.S. Board of Tea experts were photographed in 1947, gathered to taste different teas, tasked with setting quality standards for imports. Their work involved evaluating flavor, aroma, and consistency, ensuring uniform criteria for the American market. Vespa scooters were photographed in Rome, Italy, in 1955, symbolizing the vehicle's rise as an icon of practical and accessible post-war mobility. The compact, elegant design quickly became associated with the Italian lifestyle and gained international recognition. People parked along a street in New York to watch an airplane take off in 1951. The event illustrates the public's fascination with commercial aviation when flying was still seen as a modern and exciting novelty. Girls were photographed in 1968 waiting at a traffic light in Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk in the Soviet Union. The everyday scene reveals the urban environment of the city on Sakhalin Island, in the far east of the country. Marilyn Monroe was photographed in 1957, taking part in a campaign supporting the Milk Fund for Babies, a charity dedicated to children. The actress used her popularity to bring visibility to social initiatives. An office from the 1970s was documented with desks arranged with typewriters, rotary phones, and stacks of paper documents. The setting reflects the working style of the period, before widespread computerization. Glass soda bottles were widely used in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when this kind of packaging dominated beverage consumption. The material helped preserve flavor, and, being returnable, encouraged reuse practices that were very common at the time. Students were documented in the Soviet Union during the 1960s, preparing before exams. The scene shows young people gathered with books and notebooks, reflecting the emphasis placed on education in the Soviet system. A Sami man was photographed in 1883 in Kautokeino, Norway, a region traditionally inhabited by this indigenous Arctic people. The image shows characteristic clothing adapted to the harsh climate, reflecting cultural and subsistence practices tied to reindeer herding and life in frozen environments. Passengers were photographed in 1934, having lunch in the dining car of the North Coast Limited. The service offered full meals on long trips, symbolizing the comfort and sophistication of American rail travel at the time. A Coca-Cola delivery truck was recorded crossing the Pont de l'Archevêché near Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The scene combines a global icon of the American beverage industry with the historic landscape of the French capital. Manute Bol, considered the tallest player in NBA history, was photographed in the 1980s, defending the basket during his college years. Standing 7 feet 7 inches tall, he stood out for an impressive wingspan that would make him one of professional basketball's greatest shot blockers. Vivien Leigh was photographed in September 1938 in London while promoting the play Serena Blandish. The British actress was already gaining recognition in the theater before achieving worldwide fame in film. Bunny Yeager was photographed in 1954, photographing Betty Page during the famous session known as the Cheetah Shot. The partnership between the photographer and the model produced iconic images that helped shape the 1950s pinup aesthetic. Palestinian civilians and Australian soldiers were photographed in January 1942 in a lively snowball fight in Jerusalem. The image shows a light-hearted moment amid difficult circumstances, with people of different backgrounds interacting in a playful way. Michelle Phillips, a member of the Mamas and the Papas, was photographed in the 1960s with her cat. An icon of the decade's music scene, she stood out for artistic talent and for the style associated with the era's cultural movement. The Alcatraz Island Prison cafeteria menu was recorded on March 13, 1956, showing the meals offered to inmates. The list included varied items intended to meet the nutrition standards of the time, reflecting the organization of the American prison system. A dog was photographed in 1920 holding tightly to its little owner, in a scene that shows the strong bond between children and pets. The image highlights the presence of dogs as companions in family life in the early 20th century. A soldier was photographed in 1917 feeding a kitten during the First World War. The scene shows the presence of animals in soldiers' daily life, serving as companionship in adverse situations. The image highlights a moment of pause in contrast with the setting of conflict. Motorola's portable phone was introduced in 1973 as one of the first models of its kind in the world. The device, large and heavy compared with today's cell phones, represented a milestone in the advance of mobile communications. A 1920 photograph shows a street in Jerusalem with a sign in the background identifying the Palestine German Bank. The image, made more than a century ago, documents the presence of foreign financial institutions in the region during the British Mandate. Platform shoes worn by Humphrey Bogart in the 1942 film Casablanca were photographed as part of the production's behind the scenes. The accessory was needed to balance the height difference in scenes with Ingrid Bergman, who was about 5 feet 9 inches tall, roughly 1 inch taller than the actor. Stephen Hawking was photographed in 1965 with his wife Jane during their wedding. The image shows the British physicist at the beginning of his academic path, when he was taking his first steps toward a scientific career of great impact. Joe Biden and Jill Biden were photographed in 1977, the year they formalized their marriage. The image shows the future president of the United States with his partner in a personal moment before national political prominence. Albert Einstein was photographed on March 14, 1951, moments before the famous image in which he sticks out his tongue. The scene occurred as the physicist was leaving his 72nd birthday party at Princeton University in New Jersey. Leslie Easterbrook, an American actress, was photographed in 1984 during a period of major prominence in her career. Known especially for the role of Debbie Callahan in the Police Academy franchise, she solidified her image as a popular figure in 1980s film and television. Children were photographed in 1938 in front of the largest log cabin in the world, located in Portland, Oregon, in the United States. The structure had been built in 1905 for the Lewis and Clark Exposition and became one of the city's landmarks. The building stood until 1964, when it was destroyed by fire.